Let's start this series off by answering the question, what is a state? A lot of you may not be familiar with them at all. If you're a programmer, you've probably used these a lot, but otherwise, you might not have come across these at all. They're really common, you've been using them, you just probably didn't know it. A simple way to describe this is that a state is just a really convenient way for you to track the conditions and behaviors of an object or scripted system in your game at any given time. And a state machine is just a number of these states connected together by events to form some kind of a system. A great real world and basic example of a state machine would be a light switch. And this is just a simple light switch, one that has the on off positions. You'd find it on pretty much any wall of your house. And I'm not talking about the more complex ones where you can turn a dial or a lever and adjust the variable light in your room. I mean, just an on-off light switch. There would be two states in this example of the light switch. There would be the state of off and the state of on. And you would move between these two states by something called an event. Now, an event is going to change you from one state to another. So in our real-world example of the light switch, the event would be somebody reaching out and flipping the switch either up or down. So flipping up would be one event. Flipping down would be another event. We have two events. Each one will move us from one state to another. Now, it's important to point out at this point that you can't go from one state back into the same state. For example, you can't take a light switch that's already off and then turn it off. It can only go to on if you're in off. And if the light switch is on, of course, you can only turn it off. You can't turn it back on when it's already on. And that's a really important point to keep in mind as you build your own state machines, because the computer will let you do a lot of crazy things you can't do in real life, which will cause problems in your game later. Playmaker is very good about helping you with all of this, though. Now, it's also important to point out that there are no other states possible in this functional state machine other than on and off. There just isn't one. The switch only has two positions. Now, sure, you could add a position in the middle, trying to balance it. You could add a state for that. In this example, we're not going to, but it won't magically, suddenly turn into like rotated or flying through the air or anything like this. It's a very simple state machine that only does two things, and that's its point. We want it to be very simple and very effective. And a state machine can be very complex. We will wire up some pretty complex state machines and get them working in harmony with other state machines throughout this series. But to start out, let's take a look at how we would wire up this functional state machine of the light switch in Playmaker. All right, let's create our first functional state machine in Playmaker and Unity. Now, a functional state machine needs to be attached to some form of parent. In this scene, I've added a cube just so that we can go ahead and have something here to start working with. And if we look, I've got Playmaker docked down here in these two windows. And it says right-click to add FSM to cube. And that's exactly what we're going to do. In this window, I'm going to right-click, choose Add New FSM, and I get a state and a little start box. Now, start just means it's showing you where things begin happening within the state machine. So when this object, whatever it is, comes into the game world, this is what will happen first. And by coming into the game world, the start can mean maybe this is on a monster, and when you spawn the monster, this thing starts. Maybe it happens at the beginning of a level because this is a park bench with some kind of interaction attached to it. Whatever the case may be, this is where the start is. And this is one state, and we're going to need two, because if you remember off and on for our light switch, we'll need a second one. So I'm going to right-click again, choose Add New State, and I now have two states, which I can move around wherever I like. Selecting them, I'm going to just choose this box and rename it On, and this one I will name Off, because why not name states exactly what they're going to be? And I want to start my light switch in the off position, actually, now that I think about it, not the on. So I'm going to right-click on it with it selected and choose Set as Start State. And that will switch where the starting indicator is, and it will switch the beginning point. I'm just going to move these around, so I like to think from left to right here. Okay, so we have our two states. That's going to be enough for this simple state machine. And what we need to do next is make the events. If you remember, we talked about how if you reach out and flip the switch on or off, that's what changes you between these two states. And that is two events, right? One to go from off to on, and another event that will get you back from on to off. And Playmaker lets us create events directly. If you look to the right here, we have 3 tabs: state, events, and variables. You want to pick is events. And down here with add event, you choose this box and type in the name for the event you want to be. So in this case, I'm going to choose turn, helps if I spell it right, turn on, and hit return. Choose the box again, turn off. And these are our 2 events listed right here now. You can change back and forth between these, and they're going to be there every time you go back and look. And Playmaker's great about letting you rename these on the fly. Call this Bill 5. And it's just going to update it. It's really nice about letting you iterate and experiment and grow the complexity of your device as you build it. And that's really how you make a good game. So it's great that Playmaker supports us in that. So turn on and turn off. And how we activate or add one of these events to each state is through what's called a transition. If you right-click on a state while it's selected, right here at the top you have a choice for Add Transition. And go ahead and choose that, and you get this new little box down here. Those little dots indicate that this is an empty transition ready for you to fill it with an event. And you can add several of them. You can also remove them if you know, I'm just not going to need this. Now that's probably off your screen. I'm working small so that you guys can see everything I need to show you right here. So delete transition will remove one of those. I need one on each for this example. So I'm going to choose add transition on this one as well. And now we can add these 2 events that we had listed right here. So this time, this state is still selected. Click in your transition that you want to add a new event to and right click. And if you look here at the top of the list is turn on and turn off. Now those are the same events that we created right over here. And you have to create them before they're going to appear over there. By the same right, if I add a new event here, let's just say test event, just to show you, and I go back and right click again, it's added itself into this menu. You'll also find this under custom events, turn on, turn off, and test event. So you can add and remove these as you like. Here's test event. I'm going to click this box to get rid of it because we actually don't need it. So why confuse ourselves? If I look at my list again, there it is. So remember, first you have to create the event itself, then you can add it. Here we're in the off state, right? So you remember we talked about you can only go on from off. You can only go off from on. So our choice here is going to be to turn on. This is the event that we're waiting for when we're in this state. Okay, that means we're in off state. What could possibly happen while we're in the off state? So, well, I could be turned on. I can't be turned off, so there's no reason to add the turn off event. I can only turn on. Now, once again, in more complex state machines down the road, we'll have multiple ones, but let's start off nice and easy. So in the on, we've got our transition already. We can select that and choose turn off, because that is the only event that can happen while the light switch is in its on position. And we've got little indicators here, these red exclamation points that are letting us know, you've added stuff and you're not connected yet. This is really handy. It'll help you a lot down the road when you've forgotten something or you've wired something incorrectly. There's a lot of feedback in Playmaker. It even tells you down here there are 2 errors. You need to pay attention. And this is really, really cool as you're doing your development. So now we can wire these together. Transitions are what lead you to the next state. So we can assume that this is where we need to start with making our connection. So if you come to the right edge and left click on this transition, and while you're holding the button, drag out, and you're going to get this little springy arrow thing. And if you've ever made a flow chart in something like Visio or OmniGraffle, then this is the same sort of thing that's going on here. You're going to pull this out and bring it over to this state where the gray box is. As you'll notice, it's kind of sticky. As I get near it, it kind of snaps up to that side and really helps me make the connection. So it's actually pretty enjoyable to to make these things. And we've now got a connection. If you drag it around, it updates the wire. It doesn't change the flow, even though it might change the side, because if you move things all over the place, you're going to need to move these around as you build them, and you'll add a couple more, and you'll want to keep them kind of in some sort of order that makes sense to you. Playmaker's really good about flowing these little lines around and keeping the connections and letting you move the pieces about as you need to. So let's wire the turn off state back into off. Same thing, come down here, left click and hold, drag out, and as we pull, it's going to snap to the other side. That's okay, I could have come off of this side too, wired it like that. Either way is fine. I do off the right just for consistency. And you'll notice too, if you drag near the edge, Playmaker's going to scroll the window a little bit for you. And that's really cool so that you can reach things a little off screen or move around without having to stop and do all kinds of weird scrolling. Anyway, stick this right into the off state, and you'll see we've made our connections. So we now have a very basic, simple little state machine that is wired together. Now, of course, it doesn't do anything yet, and it doesn't flow back and forth. So let's go ahead and add a couple of buttons so that we can move between the on and off state. Now we're going to go to the action browser and start adding actions into each of our states. And that is where we're going to get buttons and everything else that is cool that happens within states. Let's go ahead and start in our off state. And come over here, make sure you've got state selected if you're following along. And down at the bottom is a button called Action Browser. And we want to click that, and up pops this wonderful window that is full of, man, so much stuff that you're going to do in a game. You know, here's actions for audio, things for the camera, converting, accessing devices like touch and shake. Just so many things are in here. Movement, math, materials. This is a absolute candy box of things that, bread and butter stuff we do in games over and over and over. And Playmaker is giving you really quick access to all of these sorts of behaviors and functions. In this case, we're looking for a GUI object, which is a GUI button. So up in this screen right here, this field right here, I'm going to type GUI button, and I get partway through, and of course, there it is highlighted. Now you can click on this to select it, or I'm going to hit return, which, as you can see, has added it down here, and then I'll hit escape to get rid of that. And the windows are pretty small, but you can see it's added a GUI button right down here to this action. I'm going to change my view really quick, and you can see with a taller view here that I have a GUI button, and it's got all the parameters that involve a GUI button. And if we switch to the other state, you see that there's nothing in this one. This is an empty state. Switching back to off, we see the GUI button. As you put more in, they'll list themselves here. Pretty cool. And they execute in order from top down. So good thing to keep in mind as you're putting them in. Okay, let's add right here from Action Browser. Brings this up. And this time, I'm going to get that back where I can see a little bit. I'm going to select it directly. I'm going to click on GUI. You see that shows all that, everything within the GUI. And right here's GUI button, so I can choose that again from right there. And it shows you the preview of what's in it to make sure that's what you want. So again, return and escape. And I now have a GUI button in each one. It looks the same because it's the same thing in each state. But if you watch, this is the on state, that's the off state. The name up there tells you that you have indeed changed. So switching back to my main layout here where we can see the game working. There's our mighty cube. Let's set up the button. Start with the off state button. And at the very top of the GUI button event, GUI button action, there is send event listed with a pop-up box. And if you click on that, you'll notice our turn on and turn off events are listed right there, just like these. It's letting us choose, when I press this button, what should I do? Well, you should take the action that is hanging out in this transition, right? You should be the event. If I press this button, it's like reaching out and flipping the switch. Be that event. So I'm going to choose turn on for this first button. Now, this is important. This goes back to the theme of, you can't go from off to off. What if I'd chosen turn off instead? Aha! Event not used by this state or any global transition. We get a nice big red warning here. And we get a warning over here. And we get a warning down here. There's 3 pieces of information telling us we've made a mistake. And you will make mistakes, trust me. What it's saying is if you press me, I can't take action on the turn off event because it's not part of me. What that really means is this button is local to just this state. If you change away to the other state, that button goes away. It doesn't exist anymore. It'll make more sense when we see this running. But it's saying, I can't access that. Turn off is over there in that other state, and that doesn't belong to me. I can only do things within the same state. So I'm going to pick turn on again, and we'll scroll down a little bit. Let's call this text on, because that's what we're going to do when we press it. And let me set up the button to be 0.1 and 0.1. And I found that a size of 0.2 and 0.15 makes a pretty nice little button. You can see it up there. There's a little button, on. And let's select the on state now. And we've got another button to set up. In this case, we choose turn off, because that's the action we're going to take. We can call the text off. That seems to fit pretty well. And once again, set this 0.1. I'm going to make this 0.3 from the top so that it hangs down a little bit lower so we can see both buttons individually. Once again, I'll do 0.2 and 0.15 from my size. So now I have an off button. So move between these, you're going to have 2 buttons. Let's go ahead and play and see what happens right now. Running in the game window here. Very important stuff going on right now. If you see the action that we were working with, this GUI button, is highlighted in green, which means this is currently active right there. We've also got our state highlighted in green here in this Playmaker window that tells us we're in the off state. And if you look on the parent object in the game window, you see, it might be too small for you guys to see on video, but there's a little gray box with the state name in it, which says off. And so this is 3 very important pieces of information that you can use wherever you happen to be looking to tell what's going on right now. And that's going to become really important as you step through this stuff and make sure it's working right while you develop it. Now, that being said, let's go ahead and check out our button. On, we press it, aha, and we have moved to the on state. We took this event action, turn on, we flowed into the on state. And now the GUI button, you notice it again, it might look the same, but we're now in the on state, right? So this is a different GUI button. It's the one we set up to be off, and it's now active. And the other button's gone. Doesn't exist anymore. It's been removed from the game because that was part of this state. This other button's part of that one. If we click off, we flow back into the first state, the off state, and that button goes away, okay? A really interesting thing, let me go ahead and stop this and point it out. If I had set that button, let's say the off button here, if I had set that to be at 0.1, this means it is at the same location as the other button. Okay, they're both in exactly the same space and they're the same size. If I play again, we now got the on button. I click it, we go to the other state. The buttons have still changed, but the user is going to get the impression that the button has toggled. And this is something you do a lot. This is another bread and butter trick right here. You'll swap out GUI elements for each other, but they'll sit in the same place. And this is really all you're doing when you're playing a game and you activate something like turn on my light and the little HUD indicator changes to show you, hey, your light's on or whatever. An elevator up and down. You might press the up button and then it'll change to a down button because now all you can do is come back down in the elevator, but it leaves the button in that one spot. So it's a little bit of UI. You can think of that as a trick for working with your player and keeping them focused on the information that you're giving them for interactivity. All right, we've seen our button in action. We've flown between the states, and it's still pretty boring, but we have a real functioning state machine at this point. It's pretty cool. Let's take one more step and go ahead and have it control an actual light in this scene. So I'm going to use this point light that's here in my scene as a good way to just control something from this state machine. Give you an example how this works. Right now, if we look at it, it's lighten up. If you watch right here as I move, you can see that it's kind of lighten up the front of that cube there. And it's got an intensity of 1. Set it to 0, the cube goes black. So we'll set that back to 1 as a starter. And let's find our cube and our state machine. If you lose focus of your state machine somewhere, as you're clicking around, you can just choose it and it'll pop back up. You can also choose it out of a list here. So let's start with our off state, since that's where the program will start and we create this object. And we are going to add one more action to each of these to control the light. And I'm going to change my layout again so that we can just work with the wiring here. And once again, off state, and we're going to come to the action browser, and I want to set light intensity. And there we go, set light intensity. Game object requires light component is the error we get. Now this is great because it means you can't just put this in here and do nothing with it. It's expecting to interact with something. So right here where the use owner pop-up is, choose specify game object instead, and you get a little box. And you can choose from a list of objects or some variables or all sorts of things. For this example, I'm going to just drag my point light right in there. So that is the object I want you to control. And when you set it, I want you to set it to 0. Let's take a step through what this is doing. When the state is engaged, whether it be from the start state or from flowing out of the on state, it's going to start at the top, put a GUI button on the screen with these parameters. It is then going to adjust the light intensity of this particular light object to 0. And we don't need to say every frame, because if you change a light, you only need to change it once and it stays there. If it were something you wanted to do over time, this is how you would do that. Let's add that to the on state as well. Go ahead and do our action browser. And I'll show you again, just so you've got a couple different ways of, I'll get a hold of that there, a couple different ways of knowing how to get around in this. Sometimes you know what you're looking for and sometimes you don't. So if you know it's something to do with lights, you can select lights and see all the things it can do there. And where's our set light intensity? That's what we wanted. We'll go ahead and add that. Once again, specify the game object. In this case, we're just going to drag the same point light object right down there. And we'll leave the intensity at 1 this time, because remember here it's 0. And for on, we're going to have it at 1. So that's completely off and completely on. Let's go back to our main layout so we can see the game running. And let's play this and see what happens. So there it is. We're in the off state and it turned our light intensity to 0. Even though the light is set to 1 by default, sitting in the scene, this activated it right away. And if I press on, our light comes on and we've lit it up and we've got all our feedback. If you scroll down, it shows you that the light intensity, what the settings are going to be. So off and on, we can toggle that light switch on and off, just like you do at home to annoy everybody. And look, it's a disco rave. Right there in Playmaker and Unity, you've made your own dance club. So this is a very simple example of a functional state machine that gives user feedback, does something very specific in controlling what state the game object is in at any given time, and it turns on and off a point light, which allows the player to have some kind of control over the game world, which is where fun starts, right? So that is the basics. Now we're going to work through the rest of the series on making a lot more useful, fun, functional, and complex state machines. Now, I hope you see just from this simple example that Playmaker is really easy to use. I mean, there is nothing to it. You just click some things down, choose some objects, and off you go. Now, sure, maybe your first couple of days with it, you'll be finding your way around and poking into the corners, but once you get this down, it is by far the fastest system I've ever used to put gameplay together, try out ideas, develop ideas down the line into something much more put together and final. And I've worked at several big studios, so that's saying a lot that Unity and Playmaker is bringing that to us. Playmaker is fast. It's really fast to be able to do all this stuff. If you had hand scripted all of this stuff, even if you're a good scripter, it would have taken, a little more time. And if you're not the world's best programmer, like most of us designers, we can script, we can do pretty good, but it's still going to go slower than this did. So that's pretty awesome. States can describe a lot of systems in your game. It's not just a light switch. This could be the whole scoring system. This could be something like the player health. This could be the animation graph for a character or a player. It can be all sorts of stuff in your game that you can make with Playmaker and describe with one of these functional state machines. And I should point out that these FSMs are very, very portable when you use them on a prefab, because you can set up this wiring once on one object. Say you wanted 50 light switches in your game. You could set that up once and then just drop it in all over the place, and it's going to work everywhere the same way. And that is really, really cool. That's going to allow you not only to develop your game assets faster, but it's going to allow you to put much more layers of complexity within each other and allow for more emergent gameplay as you develop things. Now, a couple of weaknesses with Playmaker, just to be fair. Everything is not always expressed best as a functional state machine. Those of you programmers among you have probably already been thinking this along the line. And it's true, you don't necessarily need everything to be a state machine. And you don't have to. You don't have to use Playmaker for everything. Playmaker works really well just interacting with scripts that you could write to do anything specific. So a little later on, we'll talk about that as well. And not everything you want to do is available in Playmaker right away. You might have some very specific gameplay functionality you need. You might have developed something more complex. And, maybe it's not in Playmaker. It's a real custom thing. But again, Playmaker is really extensible and flexible in that way. It will allow you to write your own action and put it into the action browser and call it over and over. Or you can simply talk to a script from Playmaker or talk to Playmaker from a script. It really gives you a lot of strength and flexibility for doing all sorts of stuff. You're not locked into just Playmaker if you use it. So as we go along, don't feel like it's all or nothing. This can be used for what it's going to be great for. And if you find a better way to do something else, by all means, you can do it and still use Playmaker in your workflow.